All right, hello everyone. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
We're just trying live stream up and going. Uh, Basically just waiting for that to see whether or not it's working, whether we need to restart it or do whatnot. But as soon as we figure this out, we'll get started. Should be in the next minute or so. All right, it sounds like live stream is working. So we can get started. This is Aragon Devs number 24 now. It is also a European holiday from what I understand. So there may be a few people who are normally on the call not connected, but we'll go ahead anyway with them with this call and just take notes and whatnot as we go on. As well for this time, Lewis from the association will be. He's already doing the note or the agenda keeping and setting up some of the invites and things like that, and he'll be transitioning more and more into managing this call. So this will be Lewis's first time moderating, and I'll be here to help as well in case Lewis is not sure at what to do to give any feedback. So with that, again, the first thing to do is to appoint note takers, and then we can get started with the agenda. So Lewis, you had before?
Yep. Thank you very much, Brett. I'm in Zug at the moment, so I'm with also Luis and Jorge.
Hello.
And thank you very much for the intro. So we'll start, by appointing note takers. So I don't really remember. I think last time was Otto taking notes, and I don't really know if anyone is eager to take notes. Maybe I don't know, Gabby. Would you be able to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. And then Faku, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, could you take notes too?
Yeah, sure.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And so I think Arthur just said that told me that we have new members in the chat room in the all devs this week. So maybe we could have a short introduction by new members before going on with updates. Like if anyone is new, like please feel free to just show up and give a short introduction of what you're doing and stuff.
Yeah. So hey everybody, my name is Javi. I've joined Autark last week. I'm not actually a developer. I'm mostly operating on the UI design level, and so I get to interact quite a bit more on the front end development front. And other than that, I'm very interested by the kinds of cross-team design development workflows that will come to build together. Yeah.
Cool.
It's really cool to be here.
Thank you very much. Welcome here.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chad Ostrowski. I joined Autark 2 weeks ago. This will be my third full week. I am mostly focused on front-end development at this point, and I have a background more in regular Web 2.0 full stack development. Most of the back-end stuff is not going to be applicable anymore. So front-end for now, maybe slowly moving more into the smart contract stuff as well, but we'll see. We'll see where I end up. Excited to be here.
Cool, amazing. So welcome to Chad and Javi, and I'm very happy to see these new heads helping on Aragon. That's amazing. And then if we're done with introductions, maybe we can move on to updates and start with Aragon 1.
There is no introduction.
Oh, sorry. Sorry for that.
No problem.
No.
Hi, I'm Xavier, and I'm joining Aragon Black, and I will mostly do stuff about front-end development. To start, I'll start with the front-end of Aragon Package Manager, and I joined last week, Aragon Black. And my background is mostly front-end development and art installation. And so right now I will only rely on the front-end skills I have. And I'm really glad to join this exciting project. So hi to all.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Xavier, for this intro. That's cool. That's amazing. We have three new people this week. That's great. So yeah, let's move on to the updates, and maybe we can start with Aragon 1, and probably I don't know, Brett, if you have a word or
Yeah, perhaps Jorge or Luis can take this one, or if not, then someone else from the team.
Yeah, so these past 2 weeks, we did the release of Aragon 073. That had the major feature was the client-side caching for the apps, which has been great. Also, some improvements in the like now the Help Scout widget can tell you where the contextual help depending on the app that you're on at that point. And we're working on 074, which should come out this week.
This week, yeah. And has the autocomplete for identities. So now, if you look for any custom label that you have already set in one of the boxes across the product to search for an Ethereum address or something like that, it autocompletes with that local custom labels, and then a feature that will autocomplete with Freebox and other providers as well. And we're pretty much focused on 0.8 now, really. So the new redesign and just working on 0.8 features from now until the release is out.
Yeah, apart from this, Facu has been working on voting delegation. There's a PR on Aragon Apps that's taken, it's in very good shape. So that the smart contract side of that is close to being ready. And related to the court, we had a little offsite here in Soup with the people working on the Aragon network, and we made some good progress. Still some work to be done, but most of the research questions are being solved, and it's a matter of implementing some things and reviewing and start merging that into the code. Yep.
Cool. Thank you very much, guys. If then we'll now move on to Autark. If you've got any news on your side.
Yep. So on our end, we've done a little more polish on the home app, related mostly to styling of the markdown and how the editor bar works. That should be ready for testing in the version that's not integrated into the client early this week. We've also started work on the dynamic home options, and in connection with that, very simple contract-only Aragon storage contract, so that we can save organizational settings without having to modify the kernel. We've also started on the discussions work, primarily the contracts, and John can give more details on that. But it looks like a very basic version of the discussions will be ready probably within the next 2 weeks. We've also done some further API changes. As mentioned in the previous dev call, the forwarder API changes should be ready for review, and we're still ready to respond to any reviews on those. And we've also started work on the dynamic forwarders, which is an alternative execution script tool. And most of the designs done for that, we should be wrapping up the implementation for that in the next week and a half. We also had our offsite. So out of the offsite, we generated the first draft for our AGP, which should be on the forums within the end of the week. Probably Friday is what we're targeting right now. And in connection with the offsite, we have a full strategy for the security audit to bring our contracts onto mainnet. As much as possible, we're going to be prioritizing projects. However, that's the most complicated for us in terms of getting it ready for the audit, just because we need to upgrade it to use the new standard bounties contract, which we found is already on mainnet. It's just not connected to their UI yet, so we don't think that that'll be a blocker, which is good news on our end. There's also going to be work conducting front-end audits, specifically, not security audits, for all of our applications, so that we get a better idea of what needs to be done with them in our next cycle of development, and integrating profiles into the client as an NPM package. John, do you want to go into any specifics of either the profiles integration or the discussions work, or just?
Yeah. I have some stuff to say about profiles specifically. If you're done, is it a good time now?
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So the consensus with Aragon 1 maybe 2 weeks ago was that we should import profiles as a node module into the client. I talked to Gorka about this, and that was what we thought would probably be the smoothest integration, especially with respect to code reviews and how updates would get made. Although we were still waiting for Brett to sign off on that strategy. So I'll paste the pull request in the chat right now, and you can look at the conversation there. In the meantime, I got started porting the code into a node module and publishing it. I thought that was going to be actually really easy, but I ran into a lot of problems with different bundlers. Like some are better for creating libraries, but then they stumble when it comes to things like trying to bundle IPFS or libp2p, which 3box relies on. And Webpack doesn't have those same issues, but has some others when it comes to using npm link and not bundling React, so that we don't have multiple packages, and then hooks kind of get screwed up. So there are some issues, and I guess I held off on getting too deep into that until Brett also agreed on that being the right strategy. And also, if anyone here has a lot of experience with creating libraries and the right way to compile the code so that it's compatible with the client, I'd really appreciate any tips or help, or maybe like an hour of pair programming could end up saving a lot of time. If not, I'm confident that we'll get it figured out. On top of that, also Roddick and I, mostly Roddick, got an IPFS node up and running for Autark, with sitting behind a proxy, and so we're moving off Infura, which is cool. And we're also working on documenting the strategies around running clusters with smart contract authorization for pinning. So there will be some idea generation around that stuff. That is it.
Cool. Thanks very much, John, for the Open Work Labs update, and very happy to and excited to looking forward to the flood proposal from Autark, and nice to hear that the offsite was exciting and rich. So let's move on to the next team. So maybe we can have an update from Aragon Mesh. Maybe Gabby or Daniel can take this.
Yeah, I can do it. If someone can take notes in the meantime, that would be awesome. In the previous 2 weeks, we include coveralls and start working on continuous development for the Aragon CLI. We also include a new option in the DAO act command to allow send ether with the agent app. This probably will be available on the next release. We also start working on update our roadmap and make it more accessible. And you can find a first draft of this in this link of the PR. We also redeploy Aragon snapshots to fix some issues with the content of the apps previously deployed. And we also include in this new version the survey app and the survey kit. We also deploy a testing DAO to battle test the HTTP28. I recently wrote a post with further information. This is the link. And the DAO would be in this address. And the idea for this was like trying to test a bit this new governance structure and figure out if there is some improvement before start working with the real organization. So if some of the Flux teams and the association would like to help on doing that, that would be really cool. And our next 2 weeks focus are going to be some low-hanging fruit issues we have in the Aragon CLI. We also going to review and include some PRs that are open in the Aragon CLI, which will also iterate on the Aragon APM published to output the content that is going to be published instead of fetching the repo after publishing it. This is going to be useful for also for the new decentralized Aragon PM and prevent to always create a voting before publishing, and be sure that you want the content that you are going to publish to APM is going to be the one you really want. And finally, we will release a minor in the next 2 weeks and make a proper announcement, and we hope this to become the workflow going forward. So yeah, that's the update. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you very much, Gabby, for the update. And if we have, I don't know, I don't know who we have from Aragon Black today, but yeah, happy to hear an update from Aragon Black.
Yes, I think all the devs are here, but I'm gonna take it. This was Olivier.
Oh.
So yeah, so I'll mostly work on the API, which is now called Aragon Fundraising. So we published an article on the Aragon blog about it to introduce it. Feedback was really cool. So yeah. The contracts are now ready, so they've been shipped to audit. The audit is supposed to start today. Also, Aragon One has made quick internal reviews. So we had a couple of comments from both Brett and Faku. Thanks a lot for that. So basically, we're gonna do the update this week. Also, we lost lots of time on the DAO kit system or dev architecture, like with the Docker based tests, net stuff like that. And we had weird issue like when we don't run the scripts from the DAO kit monorepo, but try to use a custom package in our own monorepo. We had tons of issue with Docker. So we lost tons of time on it. Actually, we just figured out today that it was a problem with the package.json script, which was not moving in the right directory and stuff like that. So we finally fixed it. So we're going to be able to end up the DAO kit this week. I'm not sure Luke is around. I think not, but I just need to double check with Luke that all the permissions set in the DAO kit are the right one, because there are a couple of let's say open issues, like who is supposed to be allowed to update the apps, if any, because I think in the end the bondholders don't really, I mean, too often. In the meanwhile, if we don't give them the permissions to control this kind of updates, it can be a security issue. So we end up with a tricky, let's say, use cases. So I have to figure that out with Luke, but otherwise the front end, the DAO kit will be ready by the end of the week. We also had a couple of enhancements on the front end, especially the mobile view, like for the filters and the table filters to make it much more readable in the front end, in the mobile view. So we took inspiration on the finance app and stuff like that. Also, there had been a couple of synchronization, mostly with Patty, Dim, and Pierre, I guess, around the design system to integrate it in the fundraising app. Also, some work on the onboarding screen because we want to provide people a point-and-click way to deploy a fundraising DAO. So the onboarding screens are being reworked right now. So we're gonna wait for the rework to be done, but yeah, we've made it so to be ready when it's done. So yeah, I mean, things are doing well on the apiary side, and on the Aragon PM side. So as Xavier just said, he joined our team a week ago and started working on the Aragon PM front end, mostly trying to figure out how to find a way in the Aragon UI packages, stuff like that. Also trying to do some specification around what is supposed to be the features provided by this front end, given that if we don't want to track people and we want to keep it as decentralized as possible, obviously we can't offer the most of the features NPMGS offers, like trending, packages, stuff like that. But so we will only provide some immediate and easy features like putting the packages, a version, diffing between the versions, stuff like that. And yes, I think it's all. Yeah, back to you.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for the Aragon Black update. I think we can move on to the associations update. So I'll do it on the side of the association. We've been mostly working on previously existing projects. So we're kind of in the process of still like finalizing what an SV2 will look like and how we're going to present it in the next an Aragon network vote. We've been slowly securing as per the security AGP, security audits for the different components that are in the security pipeline, and so we're in the process of securing an audit for TPS, which will hopefully be ready to the best timeline possible. And otherwise, we're in Zook this week, so I expect we're going to chat about many different interesting topics that we might be able to share either through forum posts or through AGPs in the coming days and weeks. So I'm pretty excited about these things. And otherwise, it's ongoing matters. That's it for the association. And now we can, I think, move on to the topics. So this week we have 3 topics. I think 2 of them, or I think maybe all of them, were postponed topics from the last All Devs. And the first of them is potential caching solutions. Like discussing the graph and centralized cache servers solutions. This was a topic proposed by both, I think, A1 and Aragon Black. Maybe we can start with this one.
Yeah, I can definitely introduce it in some way. And then Oliver as well was looking into the graph in specific detail about how do we improve the caching situation. And then we can also talk about how we're thinking about potentially a 0.8 solution for having this cache server. So the big problem, the topic around this is, as we saw with the Aragon network vote number 2, users of the app if it was the first time they loaded the app, or rather, if it was pretty much any time they loaded the app, it would take upwards of 10 minutes to load the new events. And this is particularly in terms of architecture and infrastructure, how we have built the Aragon client. It's meant to be used completely with a single Ethereum node right now. So it'll fetch all of the past events and sync new events only after the past events have been fetched. This is great because it means we literally trust nothing but an ETH node right now in terms of getting the events and reducing them on the client side in someone's browser. But it also means it can be very slow because as we go over time, and as we've seen over time, every month in time that passes means probably another minute or two for the initial loading speed of the client and one of its apps. So this is kind of a problem that we knew from the outset that was going to happen, but we knew that it would take a while for it to manifest, and now it's happening basically. Now we're getting to the point where it's like we need to find a solution, otherwise the app is not going to be very usable for most people for their immediate purpose, unless they're fine waiting 15 minutes every time they open it. So we've already seen kind of the stages of this with 0.7.3, where the second loads now should be much faster. If you've already synced it the first time, you can go grab a coffee while you do so. The next time you sync it, it will only grab the new stuff from the last cache block, which is really nice. It means we can tell people before a vote, a big vote like a Aragon Network vote 3, that hey, like you should open up the client maybe a day or two before, just let it sit in the background. Wait for it to sync, and then once it does, you can close it. And then the next time when you actually want to vote, it should do it super quickly within 30 seconds to a minute. Now, this again will cause problems in the future, and particularly we want the first load to be much faster than it currently is. What we currently have is kind of a stopgap. It's like, yeah, you can do it this way if you want to, but what we really want is everybody to get the second node plus experience. And the question is, how do we share this reduced state between clients, between people who have already reduced it to people who haven't reduced it? And this is kind of where some of these ideas are popping up as to whether or not we should use the graph as kind of a database of sorts of reduced state for each application instance, or whether or not we should have some sort of centralized server to hold this type of information and to try and share it. And I can, Oliver, perhaps if you want, we can talk a little bit about the graph, exactly how it's set up as an introduction, and then some of the research that you've done in that regards.
Yeah. So maybe you guys have seen a couple of weeks ago, I published a small article on the forum about the graph and the small experimentation we did with it. Especially we built a graph, kind of simple graph, allowing us to index what's going on with the Aragon package manager, so different versions of the repos and the app publish and stuff like that. So basically all the graph works is that it does mostly the same that we do, we already do on the client side. So it reduces over the events emitted by a contract. And then you can process the emitted by these events to, well, the difference is that with the graph, when you reduce on this emitted by these events, you can actually manipulate it, make some computation on top of it, and end up storing everything into a database which is GraphQL compatible and accessible. So this has one advantage, which is basically you only have to index stuff once on a given server, on a given node, and you don't have to refetch everything and to re-listen everything in your browser from the beginning each time you want to load a DAO or an app. You also have a couple of drawbacks. One being that in its current architecture, the graph is still something which is centralized, so you can host your indexing scripts and GraphQL endpoints on the graph servers. They provide an hosting service. You can also host your service on your own servers. At some point, they are now working on decentralizing this process, so there will be some kind of a consensus mechanism between the different graphs. It does not really solve the problem because to achieve this consensus mechanism, some kind of micropayment systems, and I'm not sure this is really sustainable. If people just want to load it out, to force them to pay for some request on the graph infrastructure. Also, the other problem is that if we want to do that medically, you need to give your reducing script the address of a contract to start listening to for the events. And then if this contract emits an event saying, okay, no, you have this new address to listen to, you can also, and this is what has been introduced in the recent version, you can also say, okay, no, I want also to listen this other contract, and this is our other contract, so it works well for factory contracts. The issue there is that, okay, either we take the decision to say, now we basically watch for every DAO which is deployed and every app which is deployed in this DAO, and we absolutely index everything. But as Brett told me, it has some kind of a big brother effect, which is not that cool in the end, because it means we can basically track and make public everything which happens in every DAO. Obviously, it's already the case because everything is public, but it makes it much more accessible. So it's kind of weird. The other problem is that if we don't do that, it means we have to let every app developer basically develop their own background, the graph scripts, host their own reducing script, stuff like that. So it means that the developer experience to develop app and develop the caching system is not as integrated as it is right now in the current architecture of the caching system. So yeah, the conversation we had about that with Brett was like, okay, if we can avoid using the graph for most of the application, it will be great because it will make the whole developer experience less straightforward in the end. Even though I keep thinking that the graph could be an interesting solution for specific needs, for instance, for the upcoming platform we want to build, not especially the Aragon client app, but the upcoming platform. Maybe we want to be willing to make some EV computation over what's happening in these DAOs, like make some correlation between the investors in the DAOs and stuff like that. And obviously it will not be sustainable in the client side. So maybe for some specific use cases where you have to make some EV computation on the data, where you have really, really a lot of data, because we can expect to have tons of buy and sell orders. And when you want to query this data and say, okay, I just need the data about the past week or the last past months and not the whole year, stuff like that, the graph can be interesting. But for all the other regular apps, maybe it's a lot of over for not that much. And I think that's why also it's interesting to discuss the solution that A1 has been working on locally, the central server backup system.
Yeah, and I want to stress particularly about the graph is that we were discussing using it as like the main line infrastructure for the state. And because of all of these drawbacks, it's something that can still be leveraged for certain parts of state. But in thinking about it, it would just added too much like cruft to the developer experience. You would basically have to build your app twice, once in the Aragon JS method and once in the graph method. And you will more or less have to support both depending on whether or not the user wanted to use the graph or et cetera,
Yes.
which also meant it would be super, super complicated. And it would also basically mean right now a lot of the infrastructure would be held by the association because they would be the ones hosting the graph nodes, as well as like probably only the main Aragon apps would have this capability. So the three like Aragon apps, voting, token manager, and finance would load super fast, but then the rest of our apps would take forever as before, unless the app developer specifically chose to build that infrastructure, letting the graph out themselves. So all of these things combined, we were like, this sounds like something too difficult to recommend to people who just want to build an app and they just want it to work. They just want people to install it and have it being used by people in a good experience. And so that got us thinking with a lot of the implementation work that's been done with the caching introduced in 0.7.3, how do we extend that caching even further to the server side? And there were a couple ideas around this. One is, of course, to run some of these scripts on a server and have it sync to another server. And then another is just to have your local state in your browser sync to another server. And both of these basically point to there being some service out there holding this cached reduced state for your apps. And really, I guess that is one part of this problem, having a server that is just really a simple database of like address, app proxy address, app instance address, to a JSON blob containing its fully reduced state. And then when we were thinking about having this database, we were like, okay, that means implicitly then whoever's running this database has to be, you have to trust them. You have to say, the reduced state that I'm getting from this database, I want to be able to verify somehow. I want to be able to know for sure that they haven't been cheating me in some way, either omitting events or omitting certain things like a transfer or things like that that could really mess up my my integrity, right? The integrity of my organization. And that really got us thinking, what if we applied in some ways, we have the same problem as an Ethereum node. What if we applied some of the same strategies as an Ethereum node? What if we did like the warp sync or the turbo sync? I forget exactly what the term is, but it's kind of akin to, I think its parity is warp sync, where we can grab the cache and just assume the user is notified that this cache may not be the exact truth, but at least they're working off of some reduced state already and verify that, or they can see that there's stuff going on in this organization. What they're seeing may not be completely 100% true, but at least they have some representation of it, and it leads to a better experience than just seeing a blank screen. But in the background, we can run a background process that will sync the events as we are currently, and we can, when we're done syncing these past events, we can switch over the state to basically say, now we have the events you fetched yourself, we've computed them properly in the application, and now you can trust that these are the values that you should be getting. And we can also warn the user too if the two, when we do the switch, if the two don't line up, if there's stuff missing or things like that, we can say, this cache was somehow bad, maybe you want to penalize them somehow if we build out that type of functionality. So that's kind of what we're thinking for just kind of this centralized caching server, and one that basically just is an optimistic load, and then you basically do the computation yourself afterwards. And once you have this computation, it's exactly the same as it is now. You don't have to fetch the previous states. You just keep using only the new state and apply it on top of your already cached state.
I have two quick questions. One is like this discussion is around some pretty big architecture changes. I'm wondering, in the short term, are there any like small optimizations that would make that first load faster? For example, like one that comes to mind, I don't know if this would actually be an optimization, but instead of like linearly going through all the event logs, could you parallelize like multiple processes to look at different parts of the chain and sync those together at the end or something? And that's one question. And the second question is like, with respect to trusting a centralized server, I like this idea of optimistically trusting something like that, and having this one possibility is that this centralized server could wrap an entire state into one IPFS pin and maybe just like log an Ethereum event that says, hey, at this time and this date, maybe hour, this was what the state looked like. And people could maybe disagree with that, but at least all the state updates could be on chain to be verified by any number of people on an app, and like you said, penalized after the fact.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with number two because maybe it's a little bit faster. I think number two makes a lot of sense. It's just the question of how do we do this is an open one, because we haven't worked too much on the game theoreticness and the mechanisms of what this would actually look like. I imagine something like a challenge response type of scenario would be a good use case, but it's just one that's like, seems like it would fit. As for one, in terms of parallelizing, it could be done theoretically, I think, for some use cases, but it is also very difficult to say. I'm not super sure if that is going to be true for all applications. I think for a current set of applications, at least for Aragon 1's applications, or like the core Aragon apps, that will be true, that we can parallelize events and then sync them all, like squish them all together in kind of a merge sort type of operation, or like a merge map, I guess. I'm not so sure it would work for TPS or fundraising. They may have different mutations on the state. The main problem is that, like Ethereum, we essentially have a state machine where the next event changes your state based on previous state. So we can't really jump ahead like 1,000 blocks and expect to do the same state mutations if we don't know the previous state. So like in general, I think this is a hard one to apply, but what we can do in terms of specifically making the first flow look and feel faster is chunk our syncing. What we do right now is we basically say from the time that your app was initialized, when you installed your application, to right now, which for some, like if you created a mainnet organization that's in October, end of October last year or start of November, to now, that's like more than 1.5 million blocks, I think. We do this poll of 1.5 million blocks all together, and that results in huge amount of times, like 10 to 15 minutes perhaps, depending on how the node is feeling. If you instead do it in 100,000 block chunks at a time, the results will be much faster because the operation for ETH get logs is a single operation. So we can kind of cheat it a little bit and say we're progressively syncing the state instead of getting all of it at once. And that will, of course, you'll start to see UI much faster than right now.
Now, in terms of not having to expect duplicated work from developers for the sort of like centralized solution versus the graph solution, is the assumption that there's a fair amount of code reuse that could happen in the way that state's being reduced currently within applications on the client, and how you would sort of cache that server side, or would you expect this, like, where does that come in? Where does the
Yeah, I mean, for most applications, the idea of it is to be exactly the same model as it is today. So only the front end would be syncing state. You would write the applications as they are today. You would have a web worker script that reduces the events. And then at some point, we would send this state to the server through the client. I mean, basically, the client already knows all of its state. It's just a giant JSON blob inside IndexedDB. We can simply send that through HTTP to a server and expect the server to have cached it. How this will exactly work is kind of a different question as well, and it's very related to how we do authentication with the IPFS pinning. In many ways, the authentication system may look very similar in that an organization may request a IPFS pin. The same permissions may be used to do the caching. So perhaps if it designates one member to do the pinning, it can also designate one member to do the caching or something similar. So that one person can sync and then sign the message, sign the JSON blob essentially, and then send it over to the server.
Yeah, and also there's another possibility there, which may be that instead of using a server, we can just have like a like a permission that someone, some entity, or some person in the organization can publish new hashes to like a list of IPFS hashes, and like that entity can be the one that updates the state. And so when you go into a DAO, the client just checks the IPFS hash of the state and loads that automatically. And so instead of moving like that to like one centralized server, each DAO can define its own way or person that is going to do the centralized state syncing.
I think Brett is having problems with his laptop at the worst moment. Maybe we can.
Yeah, there's more research needed.
Yeah, definitely.
There's that.
I don't know if anyone has something to add to this topic. Otherwise, we can jump to the next one, and maybe if Brett has something to add when he's back, we can come back to it and finish what we started. But overall, I think we have to work on this a bit more, and we can probably chat again during next Sol if necessary. The next topic was an IPFS follow-up. I don't know who submitted this one. Maybe it was Jonathan from Open Work Labs. I'm not even sure.
I can't remember who submitted it, but I definitely have a few things that we could talk about if we want.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, Olivier, I know you may have as well. Was there anything you wanted to discuss?
Hey, you cut a little, so I'm not sure I understood. I think you asked if I had anything to add. To be honest, this past few weeks we've been mostly focused on the PRE thing, so we didn't really move further on that. I don't know if the question was about the IPFS cluster, or if it was about the ability to use 3box from the front end.
Yeah, I think talking about IPFS cluster would be great. So at least for the next grant cycle, maybe as a Nest grant or another sort of partnership with Autark, we want to build IPFS cluster with smart contract based authentication, and there's some discussions going around on that on the Aragon chat in the IPFS dev channel. I don't know if we want to get, or we really don't have like too much time to get into the weeds on that, but I'm writing a spec for what that might look like with some other people's ideas. I'll send that out. I want to say by the end of this week, but I know things will probably get delayed. So by the end of next week, maybe I can share that with everyone. But I guess one question that I had, which was part of this discussion, is, and I wish Brett was here too, because I know he had a lot to say on this, is does anyone have any use case where an application should trigger a request to pin, and where like an application might be responsible for generating files somehow? Does that make sense to anyone, or is that, I guess one thing I'm trying to figure out is the use cases and the challenges that aren't being provided right now, or that people are struggling with.
Oh, sorry, go. I don't know who's talking.
Sorry, yeah, it's Brett. The big use case for that was forwarders, and particularly about like a voting app. If you wanted to do a vote every time you wanted to pin something, then the voting app would have to be the one sending the authentication request.
Could like, I see, I understand that use case. In the same way that maybe you would want to implement a pinning permission based off if you have a token, a native DAO token or something, could the authentication layer on IPFS cluster, considering that it's also, you know, totally compatible with the IPFS API, could the server have more of like a checking functionality where if it checks to see if a vote has passed already in some other way? I guess, like, is that the only solution to that problem, or is there a more general approach? Like, I like your watchtower idea, where maybe an app just emits an event that. Wait, can people hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So one idea, and Brett, this I think was your idea. An IPFS cluster authentication layer could have two sets of lists to check. One list could be a list of end user accounts, so just Ethereum addresses, and another list could be a list of permission or like authorized CIDs. So what I mean by that is, if you have, let's say you have an account that attempts to pin data using HTTP. First, you could check, hey, does this account is this account on the list of authorized accounts? If it is, then let the pending request go through. If the account isn't on the authorized list, then you could check, is this CID that we're requesting to pin, is this on a list of authorized CIDs? And in that way, the authentication layer could be listening to event logs and pinning the results of an event. So let's say a vote passes and that emits a pin event with a CID. Something like that seems like it could work in sort of a reactionary way to authenticate requests, rather than like proving that a CID is authorized on the initial HTTP request. Does that make sense, or was I just kind of blabbering?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think that was slightly different from maybe what I originally intended. I also don't remember exactly the original discussion, so it may have gone in various ways. But I think that works as a good one. I think it would just mean that we have a contract deployed that just emits an event on the fallback or something like that. And when people want to pin something, they just send a message to that contract with the content, and then it would just emit an event with the content, or the call data, essentially a bytes call data. Yeah, I think I may have originally said as well that we could use like a phantom type of contract or something like that, but I mean, I like this as well. It's just maybe a little bit more expensive, but it greatly simplifies the check for like saying whether or not something is approved.
Right.
The question of this, though, would be the linkage back to the organization. So I guess we would pick up the message.sender and check whether or not that had permission at the given time, which is pretty much what we have to assume anyway for other permission cases. Like, we would just have to check that if the voting app sent this message, then it did indeed have the pinning permission allowed for it. Otherwise, you could just send messages to it, and like it would have to discard ones that weren't actually properly attached to that permission.
Right. I just figure that strategy works. I feel like I don't quite know enough, but my gut or intuition is that strategy kind of fits in with the architecture that's already built kind of nicely, because presumably you could guard that. You could build some other functions that only emit events based off previous permissions or other rules. So it's really flexible and allows us to cater to all different kinds of events, and is even applicable to non-DAOs potentially, just like other dApps that would like to have some sort of similar smart contract based authorization for IPFS nodes. There are other problems too, though, which is that we don't have to dive into because we're short on time, I guess. But this is something that I've been writing, so I'll as soon as I can, I'll get that to everyone who might be interested and see what you think.
Yeah, I'm wondering as well as like next steps for this, if it's worth it finding a perhaps a larger audience somewhere just to have an idea of what the response might be, just to kind of gauge what's it called, like the it's like measuring the water maybe, or something else, like the interest level, either in the IPFS locations or Ethereum locations, to see, is this something that other people have thought about? Is it something that just sounds completely terrible because people have thought about it? Or is it like, oh yeah, we could use this too?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So after writing this up, my plan was to send it to everyone here who's interested and get feedback, as well as Hector, who's the IPFS cluster lead. And I'm happy to send it to anyone else in the Ethereum community that might be interested. I know last time we had a call, it was probably a month or two ago, on this type of topic, and it seemed like there was some interest in finding a solution with people outside of the immediate Aragon ecosystem as well. But definitely, I mean, if this is, we don't want to waste dev resources, and this isn't something that, at least for us, is in the scope of our grant. And we were talking about if there is interest, having this be part of a next grant cycle, either Nest or another AGP.
All right. Thanks all for the discussion. We have one last topic, but we're running a bit behind. I don't know if we should proceed or leave it for the next All Devs. I think that's Brett's topic. So maybe Brett, what is your thoughts about this one? Accessing IndexedDB through Aragon apps.
Yeah, this one in particular.
Oh, Brent, I was just going to say, jump in real quick. It's funny because this same issue actually has implications with running an IPFS node too. So really quickly, I don't think this is something that's like there's clearly not an easy solution for, unless you were about to jump in and give one, then my bad. But the other sort of funny thing that pops up is when we deployed the IPFS node for Autark and we started building that into our apps, because an Aragon app rendered in iframe, their origin is null. On the IPFS node side of things, you have to allow null as an origin that can pin data and accept requests, which I haven't looked specifically into what problems that might cause, but it does not seem like the safest approach. So that it was just funny that it overlapped with this conversation as well. Sorry. So yeah, continue.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have no good solution right now. And in fact, the efforts around IndexedDB are actually around securing it more tightly than we currently are, which is an interesting topic in itself. I don't remember specifically the goal of this topic, but I think there was some talk about whether or not we needed it for the Profiles app. And I believe right now the Profiles app does not need the IndexedDB access because it's been turned into part of the Aragon client. But generally for Aragon apps, my thinking is still that it seems kind of redundant for them to access IndexedDB directly when there are a couple of caching layers included in the API as well. I mean, I imagine it's mostly third-party libraries that would leverage IndexedDB, like 3box ultimately does. But I think there were also some conversations around whether or not we could shim that into the API itself. So like an IndexedDB.read would kind of point to the API level instead of the native IndexedDB.
Yeah. The context for this was like Profiles and really any other app, like the Discussions app, potentially not anymore needs, but depending on what the architecture was, it was possible that that would be useful. But I think for most of these, you're right. I don't see a use case for an Aragon app to use like IndexedDB over the cache that's already provided for. So I think the solution could be built into the other libraries that are being brought in. For example, with OrbitDB, you can replace their store, and they're building support for that. So basically just saying to Orbit, hey, actually don't use IndexedDB. We want you to use the Aragon cache and have that be built into their technology. So that seems like probably the most sustainable, since it doesn't look like changing the iframe securities is really an option at this point.
Yeah, I think specifically the iframe security model is one that is difficult to revisit and would at some point be nice to have real security professionals take a look and get a sense of like what their temperature check is on how safe it is. Particularly, there are kind of weird loopholes with some of these security sandboxes we've been navigating through. Web workers in general have slightly different assumptions about what their model is. For example, you can't access local storage, but you can, interestingly, access IndexedDB. Yeah, there are just some interesting things to look at if we want to revisit that. Yeah, I mean, I really don't have too many other good comments or solutions for this outside of it's kind of a much larger topic and scope than we currently have resources really to dedicate towards researching other solutions.
Yeah, I think we just
I mean,
hunt on it.
Yep.
All right. I think if we're done with this one too for now. We're done for today. So thank you everyone, and thank you like Brett for attending, although you're abroad and facing your laptop issues at the same time. And yeah, and see you guys in 2 weeks then. And have a great week in front of you, hopefully.
Everyone, take care.
Bye.
I think.
Bye, guys.
Chad, did you
Also,
want
guys.
No, I wasn't sure with that button, but sorry.
Always the first time.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.